So this is the second video, and I'm going to talk about the definition of design thinking and also how we wanted the participants to think about how they apply design thinking to their field and how they introduce design thinking to their audiences, because they are looking at different areas. So we think of design thinking as a creative problem-solving approach that is user-centered, takes a systems perspective, and because it does take a systems perspective, it often leads to creative outcomes because you're combining ideas from so many different places and spaces that when they come together, new things get created. And it's also very collaborative, and it often would involve a number of people instead of having one person do a project. So that's how we define design thinking. You can look at it from so many different angles, but we think this definition is quite clean because it touches on the key aspects, right? So you're designing for a person or a persona, and you're not only looking at the problem where it happens, but a little removed. So we call it the 100-foot view, if you will, or the 10-meter view. You come up a little bit and you explore the problem in the context. So because of that, you're touching stakeholders and you're touching other factors that impact the problem, and you're doing this in a creative way with an open mind and really looking for unusual insights that you can focus a little bit more on or probe a little deeper on. So then the question is, how does it apply to these various fields that the participants have chosen? And the way we challenge them to think about that is to think about how they introduce design thinking to their chosen audience. Right? So I'll give you a couple of examples. When I've spoken to product developers or software engineers about design thinking, I often use the angle that design thinking is your requirements definition approach, or your requirements gathering approach, right? It helps you go out there to gather requirements about the problem you're trying to solve before you ideate, right? Because a lot of product developers will come up with something and then go test it and go prototype, rather than taking 2 steps back, if you will, and going to talk to the user or potential user and understand their pain points and their needs before they actually ideate. A lot of them will tell you that they do that, but then when you walk through the process with them, they admit that they don't. So the argument that design thinking is a great way of doing requirements gathering appeals to them. Now, when I talk to entrepreneurs, I tell them that design thinking is a way to get into the heads of their users so that they can create products and develop business models that fit, on target. And that often works because we do a couple of demonstrations. Sometimes you do role plays, and then you realize that they haven't really focused on understanding the user, right? So that appeals to them. When I talk to policymakers or people who use a variety of data or large numbers of data or volume of data, what I use to sort of approach the topic of design thinking is that it's a great way of visualizing the information they have, right? So I'm taking the different steps in the design thinking process and using this to sell the approach to so many the different types or audiences that I speak to. So for policymakers, they like the idea that they could use design thinking, one, to understand the problem they're trying to solve, to bring stakeholders together, but also to visualize the information they develop. So a common line is to say, well, you come up with a 50-page policy, who's going to read that? But if you understood your user very well and you created visualizations of boxes and arrows or infographics of this policy, then very quickly it becomes consumable, right? People are more likely to sort of want to understand what the policy is about or how it affects them and stuff like that. And it's not just the sound bites that they hear on radio and on TV. So policymakers like that, they like that angle. So the challenge to participants at that stage was, how are you going to introduce design thinking to your chosen audience? To the environmental activists, or to journalists, or to product developers, or to software engineers or to students or to entrepreneurs, whoever you pick, how are you going to introduce design thinking to them?